I'm sure you're all aware of the hantavirus outbreak on a cruise ship, COVID 2.0. Probably not, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So today we're going to break down what we actually know in an official capacity, as well as some of the internet rumors that are circulating around it. So the quick rundown is there was a cruise ship. It began traveling from South America around Argentina through the Arctic region and towards Africa. There were roughly 150 passengers, and so far, three people have died from hantavirus. There's a Dutch couple and a German national. There are also several other confirmed cases of the disease, as well as people under monitoring by the CDC and the WHO and other organizations worldwide. So typically, this is caused from rodent exposure, but in this particular case is the Andes strain, which is transmissible human to human. And that's part of what makes this so bad. They're on a ship, they're all in close quarters, constant contact, and this particular virus has a fairly long incubation period. So it may be weeks before these people end up showing symptoms. It was also likely picked up in Argentina, where it's endemic. So the official explanation actually makes a little bit of sense here. It got picked up, they got put on a boat, people on the boat got it, some people in the airplane after they left got it. I'm not saying it's a weapon or that it was a lab release or that Argentina did something they shouldn't have or anything of that sort. I'm not saying that everyone's doomed. So, theory one, this is just being downplayed. This is actually fairly straightforward. Officials are just trying to not cause panic. They say, hey, yeah, there are some people that have it. Yeah, some more people will probably catch it, but we're going to have it all wrapped up in a couple of weeks. And this kind of makes some sense. No one wants to cause panic for something getting overblown, because then no one's going to listen when something actually happens. And no one wants an agency to get blamed, and no one wants to be that guy. So this is more about liability than anything else. It's still kind of a cover up, but it's not necessarily malicious. Theory two actually looks at patient zero, because no one really knows what happened beforehand that would have caused it. So again, a natural explanation works fine here. People go into a rodent contaminated environment, breathe the particles, get sick, is textbook. But if you start looking into it a little bit beyond that, we don't really know anything about the people on board, what they do for a living, if any of them are, say, astrophysicists. We have a few various nationalities, a couple of genders, and that's really about it. Hope you guys have your cork boards ready. Argentina recently opened a biosafety level 4 laboratory. That's the type of facility that you use to determine dangerous biological threats, how to deal with them, that kind of thing. It's the only one in Latin America. Now, there's no public record of this lab having anything to do with the outbreak whatsoever. The facility's main purposes are to detect and study these types of pathogens. But that's if we're all being responsible. So when you're looking at it from that angle, they're in Argentina. It's the Andes virus. There's human to human transmission. There's an international outbreak. You have a new lab. That doesn't prove a line. But there are definitely dots there. In the conspiracy world, dots are all you need to get started. So even though it's quite a leap to say Argentina has a Bio4 lab, therefore the outbreak came from there, they also said the same thing about COVID, and then turned around and said that it probably did, and then turned around and said it probably didn't. You know the drill. Another interesting tie in here is 2 years ago, some vials of hantavirus went missing from a lab in Australia. The official explanation? Bad paperwork. Having worked in a lab, bad paperwork is certainly a thing. It happens all the time. I don't work in a Bio4 lab. I would assume that handling paperwork correctly in a Bio4 lab is much more important than the type of work I do. And paperwork's still pretty important. But you're looking at hantavirus here, a dangerous virus from a government lab. There's missing inventory and delayed discovery. That doesn't mean Australia caused it. That doesn't mean that those files ended up on this particular cruise ship. That's a little bit crazy. But these types of things do hit a lot harder after COVID. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper. What if this is an accidental transmission experiment? So a cruise ship is basically a closed human network. You have cabins, meals, crew, medical staff, so on, so forth. If you have a virus there, that is a nightmare if you're an epidemiologist. but it's also pretty valuable data. Who sat with who shared cabins, who developed symptoms first, who stayed healthy, who's positive. This is all legitimate outbreak investigation. That's exactly what a public health official should do. But conspiracy minded people hear that and say, so they're watching it like an experiment. And here's the uncomfortable part. In one sense, every outbreak becomes an experiment. Not in the intentional sense, but an event that generates data. Authorities learn how viruses behave, how people behave, how systems behave. They learn how ships, ports, hospitals, governments, and media react to these things. And if something becomes useful after the fact, then it's hard to prove that it wasn't planned from the start. It's a pretty dangerous leap, but it's a pretty predictable one for people to make. You're going to need a whole tenfold Tyvek for this one. Full-blown bioweapon. What if the point wasn't really mass death? What if it was a small, contained, real-world stress test? A confined international population. A pathogen scary enough to trigger serious response, but not contagious enough to guarantee global spread. A ship full of passengers from different countries. A slow incubation window. Medical evaluations. Ports making decisions. WHO coordination. CDC monitoring. Media coverage. Social media speculation. Public reaction. Officials saying over and over again the risk is low. In this version, the virus is only half the story. The real test is the system. How fast is detection? How does the public respond to another rare virus after COVID? How much trust is actually left? That's the theory being tested. Not can we kill millions of people, but can we watch the world react? So, where do I land in all this? Well, until you can show that maybe it's being spread through aerosol or something like that, it's most likely just natural exposure. This virus is endemic to Argentina. The people were in Argentina. They got on a boat. And if you know anything about being on a cruise ship, when any kind of virus is going around, everybody gets it. You have close quarters, shared ventilation. You don't need the secret lab. You don't need the stolen vials. You don't need a bioweapon program. It doesn't need a test run. As of last time I checked, there were 3 deaths and a handful of people that contracted the virus. But I do get it. There's a lot of distrust in all of these organizations after COVID. So keep your head straight. Don't panic. Don't blindly trust everything. Don't blindly assume conspiracy. Watch the facts, the language, what gets confirmed, and what quietly changes in the background. Watch what countries and how many cases there are after this incubation window closes. And above all, remember this. The scariest stories aren't always the ones where conspiracy is proven. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones where official explanation is probably true, but no one trusts the people explaining it anymore.